Welcome to the Even Careers podcast. I'm Ellen Sullivan, co-founder of Even Careers, and today I'm joined by the wonderful Rosalind Chow, Associate Professor of Organizational Behavior and Theory at Carnegie Mellon University, and she's also the author of the book I would recommend on sponsorship, The Doors You Can Open. In today's conversation, we explore Rosalind's expert view on sponsorship, one of the most powerful yet overlooked drivers of career progression. So if you're looking for sponsors or seeking to understand how to be a sponsor, this episode will be a game changer for you. In the episode, we talk about the important differences between mentorship and sponsorship, how career success is not just about being a high performer, but being seen as one, the best way to attract and gain sponsors, and the surprisingly simple sponsorship acts that can elevate both other people's careers and your own. Rosalind's an expert I look to again and again to understand how power, status, and opportunity shape our careers. I can't wait. Let's get into it and chat to Rosalind. Let's get even. Hi, Rosalind.
Hello.
Hello. Lovely to chat to you today. Thank you for joining the Get Even podcast.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Now I introduced you and raved about your book before we brought you on. But the question for me is, with the doors you can open, like the question that just comes to mind is, where did the idea for the book come from? It flips those traditional concepts of networking and sponsorship. It's a very bold, different idea. And so I'd just love to understand where that idea came from.
Thank you for asking. So I have been studying inequality of some form for a long time. I got a little tired of talking about how inequality is basically here to stay for all sorts of reasons. And I wanted to study how people could actually help, and started looking into mentorship and sponsorship and realized that at least the academic literature on sponsorship is actually not very far along.
Okay.
And practitioners actually have been talking about sponsorship, I would say, longer than academics have really been studying it as its own thing. So I got really interested in understanding what mentorship is and thinking about how sponsorship is actually totally different from mentorship. And then actually started doing some executive education around these topics and having program participants always asking me for more. And I didn't really have anything to give to them. So I thought, well, if I can't find the resource that I want, then I should go ahead and produce it.
Amazing. That's really good to understand. With the idea for the book and the background in power and status, like, how does that come into how you view sponsorship?
Well, I will say at first, what I was trying to do to tell people who are typically in positions of greater power that that they can do more than be a mentor. And so I think a lot of people have a tendency to see mentorship and sponsorship kind of as interchangeable things. So mentorship is, it's a form of what we call a workplace support, right? But the way I think about it is it's when somebody talks to you in an effort to try and change you as the mentee. So when someone gives you feedback about how you present yourself or on skills that maybe you should develop if what you want to do is, move on in your career, or even if you go to them and you're like, I have this tricky situation, how should I handle this? All of that conversation that the mentor has with you is really about changing your behavior and the way that you're thinking about things. And sponsorship is acting on somebody completely different, right? So a sponsor is not trying to get their protege to change. They're actually trying to get some external audience, right? Other people
Yeah.
to change how they see that protege.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of people out there who think that they are mentors and sponsors, but
Mm-hmm.
in reality they're actually they're just mentors, which
Mm-hmm.
is not to say that that's bad. It's just that there's also more that they
Mm-hmm.
could be doing
Yeah.
that they might not realize they could be doing. And so one of the reasons I wanted to write the book was really to give people who want to help make the world a little bit more equitable or more equal, to give them some strategies for how they can do that. While writing the book and doing the research for the book, what I came to realize is that power is not everything. And that sponsorship really operates using a slightly different idea, which is status.
I think the difference between power and status is like super important because it makes it feel accessible, to be honest,
Mm-hmm.
if we understand the difference.
Yeah, so most people tend to think of power and status as kind of like the same thing. For academics, though, we distinguish between them. Power refers to control over resources.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, I can get people to do what I want them to do because they have to. Because if they don't do what I want them to do, I can take away some sort of resource, right? Or if they do actually do what I want them to do, I can reward them with some sort of resource that they want. So that's power. And
Mm-hmm.
then status is operates differently. Status is the respect and admiration that people have for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so in real life, often those two things go hand in hand, right? Is that the people we respect and admire tend to be the ones that we put into positions of power, and so most people kind of see them as being the same thing. But again, we do things for people who have status because we want to, not because we have to.
Mm-hmm.
And so this becomes important with sponsorship because people always also have this assumption that to be a sponsor, you have to have power. And one of the things that I think is, important for people to know is that no, actually anyone can be a sponsor. The reason sponsorship works is because of status, not necessarily because of power. And that is because sponsors who have people who trust them are the
Mm-hmm.
ones who are more effective at being sponsors.
That's great because it shows how we can all be sponsors and we might have a broader impact potentially as we move up on the hierarchy. But at the same time, there's really an opportunity for all of us to think about how we could be a sponsor. And we'll get into that in more detail because I think what's really interesting is that you really kind of prove out something very interesting about how sponsorship can work for your career, no
Mm-hmm.
matter what level you're at. So we've talked a bit about the difference between mentorship and sponsorship. What I'd love to understand from your perspective is, what does mentorship change? And then what does sponsorship change?
So I like to think about it as mentors help turn you into a strong performer,
Mm-hmm.
but sponsors are the ones who help you get seen as a strong performer. Right. So it's this question of like, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around, you could like
Yeah.
hear or see, like, did it actually fall? Same thing kind of with employment is, you could be an amazing employee, but if no one else sees it, then that's not really doing much for you if your goal is to advance in your career. So you need, some people might think like, well, okay, the way I deal with that is I go out and I promote myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I make sure that other people know that I'm
Mm-hmm.
great. There are lots of cultures where we're socialized, or not just cultures, right? Like there are certain kind of social groups where we're socialized not to self-promote. And in fact, if we do, there's penalties
Mm-hmm.
associated with self-promotion. And so a way to get around that is to have sponsors who can help you with that social visibility and making sure that you get credit for the work that you're doing and the contributions that you're making. And that actually helps you avoid what we call the self-promotion paradox, which
Yeah.
is people know about your capabilities, but they don't necessarily like you as much.
Yeah. Yeah. What I see a lot of leaders when they get to mid-career, or professionals when they get to mid-career, the strategies that worked for them early on in their career of being a high performer aren't working for them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They're incredible at their jobs and they can do so many different things, but they're not getting that career momentum that they need. And what I see is that the relationships that could help them advance have been underinvested in.
Mm-hmm.
And so like this point you're making really here about you need sponsors to be talking about you to actually help you kind of get to that next phase in the career that you want.
Right.
And so, I mean, how early should someone really be thinking about having sponsors?
Well, I don't think it's ever too early
Yeah. Yeah.
to have a sponsor. We could have a whole conversation about how AI is making it harder for, job applicants to
Mhm.
really stand out. And
Mhm.
so the thing that actually makes the biggest difference is actually networking, right?
Mhm.
And creating real connections and relationships. And sponsorship also then plays a big role. Is like I have basically, recruiters are just awash in
Yeah.
all of this
Mhm.
data, and it's so much easier for them if there's a sponsor who can just cut through all that noise and say, you trust me, well then I want you to know about Ellen, and you should trust Ellen because you trust me, and I think she's amazing, right? And that obviously like gives the protege a huge leg up when they have someone to vouch for them in that way.
For ambitious women who want sponsors, knowing how those sponsors can change their careers, what is the best way for a woman to approach it? And
Yeah.
yeah, how what is a practical approach that a woman could take?
So my recommendation, I since I talk about sponsorship all the time, I always get this question of like, well, how do I find a sponsor? Like they're so important. And absolutely, yes, they are very important. The issue with approaching relationships with this idea of like, I need to find someone to
Mhm.
sponsor me. So I talk about this in the book where like one, it automatically puts you in a position of lower power because
Mhm.
you are essentially saying that somebody else has some sort of thing that you need from them. And it immediately turns relationships into this kind of like more transactional thing that people find really icky about networking. So my advice is typically to not look for sponsors, but to constantly look for opportunities to sponsor other people. And what that allows you to do is to gain that same social visibility, but
Mhm.
without having anyone necessarily question your motivations.
Mhm.
Because when you're out there sponsoring other people, saying great things about them, making introductions for them, right? Because sponsorship is it's generous.
Mhm.
You're giving away access to your network to other people, but by being generous, you sidestep this question of whether you're doing this for yourself or not, because it's so obviously good for the other person. So I like to say, to get a sponsor, be a sponsor first.
Yeah.
Because when people hear you talking about them in this like nice way, or they like are you're happy to make introductions for them, or you're happy to refer them to someone else, they remember that kindness, and people have a tendency to want to reciprocate in kind, right? So then they're going to try and find opportunities to say nice things about you, right? But the other thing that is helpful is that it makes you visible to other people
Mhm.
because you're the one who is willing to someone else up. And so not only does the protege get, that nice hype, you get credit for being the hyper. So there's research that essentially shows that like when you go out and you sponsor other people, not only does the protege get like seen higher in status, but the person doing the sponsoring also gets higher status.
I love that because it makes it feel accessible. Everyone knows how to talk nice things about others.
Yeah.
It can feel very hard, right, to try and find that sponsor who's going to change your career. Whereas those incremental sponsoring of others will help get you seen from the sponsors that you're probably looking for.
Yeah, it really does have this side benefit of making you just like a much more likable person. So I know there are a lot of women who they have this conflict between like I want other people to take me seriously, right? I want to be seen as competent, but oftentimes for women there's this competence warmth trade-off where if you're super competent, people tend to think that you're not very warm. And so sponsorship is actually a way for you to demonstrate this warmth component without at all undermining necessarily anything about your own competence.
Yeah. And still thinking about your career. So that it's you're not having to give up anything in your career by sponsoring others. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it's, sponsorship very much the way you describe it, it's an option for everyone. It's an option for all leaders, frontline leaders, middle managers, all the way up the hierarchy. And in your book, you talk about, this continuum of behaviors of sponsorship. So I'd love to, if you could just talk us through those in a bit more detail.
So one way to think about it is attention, action, and interpretation. So basically, the question is creating a positive impression of somebody else. And so this is about attention, right? You're getting other people to pay more attention to someone they wouldn't otherwise have paid attention to. Action is when you're essentially asking other people to treat the protege a particular way. And so when you say, if I were to go to someone's boss and I said, you know what, Ellen is amazing, she should get a raise, like she's the one we should be promoting, that is asking for someone else to engage in a particular action on the behalf of the protege, right? So it can be attention is, again, focusing people's attention, right? Making them more aware. Action is actually asking for a specific outcome. And interpretation is asking people to change their mind. So like reinterpret some existing data point that they already have, often in the negative side. So maybe, I was in charge of a project and it wasn't particularly successful. You might go into this meeting where they're like, Rosalind and her team just did not do very well. And you, as the sponsor, would say, yes, but also no one's teams did very well. Like, this is not a Rosalind problem. This is like, we have an economic downturn and it's like everyone is suffering, right? So don't come away with the conclusion that there's something wrong with Rosalind. Like, there's something wrong with the situation that could explain what has happened here. So it's providing some external, like additional information or external kind of context as a way to get people to kind of change their understanding of what has happened with a protege. So in the book, that one's called Protect.
Yes, I can.
Now, we're thinking about it as interpretation.
And would I be safe in kind of making an assumption that the attention piece is maybe the easier place to start?
Absolutely.
Interpretation, yes. If you're going to try and change someone's mind about someone,
yes,
you have to be very trusted to be able to do that.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. So the easiest kind of entry point to sponsorship is attention. And so that is something anyone can do. As you mentioned earlier, right? Saying nice things about other people is like anyone can do that. And there's really almost no downside to doing it, unless you're making untrue claims, which I would never recommend anyone do. But, it just means paying attention to other people's good news or the contributions that they're making and being willing to name them in front of others so that people feel acknowledged and recognized and validated. I mean, that's if you're doing it in front of them. But there's also the other version, which is, you do it when they're not actually around. But you get a lot of trust by saying nice things about other people, because what you're essentially showing is, one, that you pay attention to other people. Because most of the time we're just like, we're thinking about ourselves, right? We're not paying attention to other people. And so if you are actually paying attention to other people enough to say nice things about them, like, that already makes you stand out. But it also means that you aren't threatened by other people's success, that you care about the group kind of like more than you care about yourself. And that is actually the path to status. The way you gain status is by being a really good group member. And the way to show that you're a really good group member is to behave in ways that demonstrate that you understand what's valuable to the group, and that you are willing to put the good of the group above yourself. And so sponsorship actually fulfills both of those points, because when you're saying nice things about another person, it matters what you're saying the nice things like for, right? So, if I were, in my job, if I knew that one of my colleagues was also like on the side an amazing artist, well, unfortunately, being a great artist to the other kind of business school faculty is it's an oddity, but it's not like not a core value.
Yeah, it's not a core part of being an academic.
Right.
Yeah.
So for me to go around being like, hey, like, this guy is a really great artist, it shows that, one, I'm paying attention, but maybe I'm not actually like clued into precisely like what matters, right, to the group. So you want to be discerning in terms of like what you decide to call out about other people. Again, because you don't want there to be any confusion about whether or not you understand what's important to the group.
Yeah, and I mean, it shows like there is a riskiness, right, to sponsorship. But, if you're already being the person who's going, well, actually, I want to do more. These are some really, you call them small acts of sponsorship. And so this easier one to start with, the attention space, you've just given some really kind of practical ways that you can start doing that. But I'd love to know more, what are some of your favorite small acts of sponsorship? In the work we do at Even, we meet a lot of people who they go, what more can I do? And so what are some of like the small acts of sponsorship that you really kind of just would say, like, these are the ones to go ahead with. These are the ones that always kind of really work.
Yeah, I'll tell you about two. One is when someone comes to you with a question, another person would be like very like perfectly suited to answering. You just say, actually, I think you should, I can give you this answer, but you should go and talk to this other person because they are the experts on this. And if you don't, do you know that person first, right? Would you like me to introduce you? Because you're just trying to make it easier for them to make that connection together. So offering to make an introduction is a great way to be a sponsor. The other one, and I think this one's perhaps a little bit less obvious. It will be obvious once I say it, but maybe less obvious if you didn't have someone telling you about it, is making sure that people are invited to things.
Yeah.
That they aren't
the right areas. Yeah, right rooms, right, opening the right doors, hey?
Yes, exactly, right? It's like, okay, this person isn't in this meeting, but I actually think they would have a really important perspective that they could bring, right? And so making sure that they're invited, or they get, access to conferences that they would not normally right, think to go to, or maybe some conferences. So what I love about the inviting people places that they wouldn't normally go is that that's a way to engage in showing, because you're giving the other person an opportunity to be in a space and visible to other people who like normally wouldn't have a chance to meet them. If you can just get them so that they have, the spotlight or the opportunity, and then they get to shine themselves, right? Then other people are going to come away from that encounter thinking very positively about that person, but no one had to tell them that that was what they were supposed to think.
Yeah, they got there on their own. They thought it was their own
Right,
brilliant insight, and everyone loves to think that they worked something out themselves.
right, exactly.
Amazing. No, they're two small acts of sponsorship that so many of us can do. And like to finish up, and you've highlighted this all the way through our conversation, but I'd love to just ask you the question again so that people really fully get it. What
Okay.
are the benefits to your career when you sponsor others?
People are going to respect and admire you.
Yeah.
You will gain status from being a sponsor. This assumes
Mm-hmm.
that you sponsor appropriately. And what I mean by that is like you're not misrepresenting the protege, right? And that you're pairing the right protege with the right opportunities, but assuming that you have reasonably good social astuteness and can do that well, the dividends can be huge. So there's this other research that basically shows, for instance, that managers who are consistently good at elevating their high performers such that they actually end up leaving that person's team and going off and doing great things on their own. Those managers have great reputations within their organizations. They're seen as developers of people,
Mm-hmm.
which is really huge for as a leadership skill, but also word gets around and people will like the high quality performers in the organization are all going to want to work
Yeah.
with that manager. And so it really is one of those things where the more you give, the more you get. And so I would highly recommend that, try baby steps, right?
Yeah.
Try the little small ways of sponsoring other people, but over time you will build a reputation for yourself as someone who is generous and genuine, and that is an amazing reputation to have.
Thank you, Rosalind. I love the way that you have really opened up the whole idea of sponsorship and that yeah, everyone can do this. It's not just for those at the top. And you think about if everyone was sponsoring someone within an organization, the benefits to productivity, the benefits to people's careers, and also I think the benefits to kind of the leadership we want to see within organizations as well. You've shown that, sponsoring others helps your career. And I love how accessible it is. So thank you so much for your time and thank you for being
Thank
on
you.
this podcast.
Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for listening today. I'm Ellen Sullivan, co-founder of Even. Find out more about Even at even-careers.com and tune in next week to hear from another amazing woman in business.